Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi, Nikki. I'm doing fine.
Cool. I'm Nikki Fairchild, and I'm the Associate Head of Research and Innovation at University in Portsmouth. And handing over to you, Joe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Albin Clarke. I'm a senior lecturer at Edgehill University, where I'm interested in how young children learn.
And we want to talk to you today about an experiment we've been doing on a Padlet board. We've called it our Techno Tempo Carto Embodiment, and we've used this to track and trace our post-pandemic lives. We're building on a little bit of theory, so particularly post-phenomenology, and we're using post-phenomenology to illuminate our entanglements. And we include in this bodies, so human, non-human, other than human bodies, art, objects, theory, technology, and we're using this to explore the limits of our own post-pandemic worlds or pandemic worlds via this online journal. So we're trying to illuminate these entanglements. And we draw on the work of Laura Treffy-Pratt, who has, here you can see on the Padlet, who's written about post-phenomenological life worlds. We've been really interested in her theorizations, and it's helped us get to where we are today. And I'm going to hand over to Joe to talk about Cabinet of Curiosities.
Well, Cabinet of Curiosities is something that's really caught Nikki and I's attention. And the Cabinet of Curiosities is an old idea. It comes from natural history specimens and origins that were collected in the 16th and 17th century by people like clerics and princes and earls. And they collected these little curios, also known as wunderkammern, in these cabinets and bureaus, and to look at a later date. And you can see on the back of our Padlet, we've got these like museum drawers. So in our thinking, we're imagining all the objects and bodies and people as being a little object in one of these drawers that we're opening out and thinking with. And writers such as Maggie McClure say that this sort of approach as Cabinet of Curiosities can be thought of as like an artistic method. And the idea is that these cabinets of curiosities and these assemblages and juxtapositions of all these objects and bodies and things help us to resist ideas of mastery, bureaucratic reason, and a single point of view, and that we really were really encaptured by this idea of Cabinet of Curiosities.
Yeah, and I think not only were we captured, we were thinking about some of those affective and political questions whilst the pandemic was happening, but also we've been journaling together for some time in these post-pandemic worlds or pandemic worlds. And we've used the Padlets as almost this sort of rhizomatic contact point where there's no necessarily logic to it. It becomes a collection of thinking and of theory and of our experiences that become a multiplicity of the things that we've been doing. It's a little bit of a meandering, and it links to some of the, we call them crazy conversations that we've been having around these things. But what it's really helped us do is to think about our own experiences, our own post-phenomenological experiences during the pandemic, and how these bodies have impacted our way of thinking, and how we can use this as a methodological tool to think through what we're doing and where we're going, and to try and make some sort of sense or nonsense of our worlds.
Oh, I love that sense and nonsense bit, Nikki.
Yeah, thinking about the logic of sense and Deleuze, how it's sometimes it's nonsense, but it's important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the lovely thing as well about thinking with cabinets and curiosity is the political questions it opens. So again, on the Padlet, at the end, we're going to welcome you to have a little look at our Padlet, and join in with it. And we've put lots of writing there about Cabinet of Curiosities, and also some of its more museum-based roots there. But it's really interesting how more recently in the museum world, there's been a real turnaround with thinking about where do these objects come from, what's their provenance, what's their history, how does it illuminate questions such as race and things like capitalism and power, so it's so much to so many entry and exit points, aren't there, in this way of thinking?
Definitely. And just building on that, Joe, we've also been thinking about Anthropocene and post-anthropocentric worlds, We work with young children and we work with teachers who teach young children, and thinking sustainably is really important. And if you can look at the picture in the blue there, this is a picture of a beach that's reasonably local to me. And part of our connecting has been those relational connections we've made environmentally, whether it's in more natural or more urban environments. And we've been thinking a lot about the Anthropocene. And if we think about some of the politics Joe was talking about, those politics of, race and the intersections of race and social class and globalization and racialization and capitalism, we have to acknowledge that from an Enlightenment and Western perspective, governments and people and communities have been pursuing extractive politics and extractive ways of engaging with the global majority for many, many years, and all done under these progress imperatives and capitalist imperatives. And Anna Singh and colleagues write quite beautifully on this. So I think it's important that we start to reflect on these sorts of things and how we as educators and scholars can use these types of tempo embodiments to really track and trace our own thinking about these and the way our thinking changes.
Yeah, Anna Singh's work is really a touchstone for us, isn't it, really, in this turning to notice. And of course our beautiful colleague Carol Taylor writes beautifully about noticing the world around you. So maybe through this work we're stopping and pausing and thinking a while with these things, aren't we?
Definitely. And that also then helps us to resist some of that accelerated view of the way we should live our lives, accelerated capitalism, the accelerated university, the way that we push children, young people through schooling and universities and into jobs. Sometimes it's really important just to take that step back and to turn to notice and to just let things settle and to do that meandering, that meandering
lovely
around physically, theoretically, conceptually, to see what it might offer us.
And that slowness, I suppose what we're doing is engaging in some slow scholarship, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've been collecting these things for a couple of years, and Nikki and I have known each other for a bit longer than that. And I think, we're not rushing, what we're thinking about it, we're presenting at things, but we're not rushing to write because we want to take time to wallow in this thinking and percolate and just give it its due, really.
Definitely, I think so. And the more we read and the more we talk, the more we think, the more it pings off in different directions and gives us different entry and also exit points. We've also got some other things we might want to talk about. So I'm going to go a bit further down the Padlet, and I'm going to turn over to you, Joe, to talk about Lego and motorways.
Yeah. Now, here we go for some strange objects in our cabinet of curiosities. And my first little object is this little tiny Lego figure that you can see. Now, this Lego figure you can see exists with a little bit of a motorway, a photograph taken out of a window of a door traveling down a motorway. And what these objects, when I juxtapose them together, I've been thinking about this little figure and its power and its thingness, and what strikes me about it is its plastic nature. It was in my grown-up son's bedroom. He doesn't live with us anymore. He lives with his girlfriend. And this little plastic figure used to live in my pocket, at times when we couldn't see our family members. And this little object, and me holding the figure in his hand and recalling our frantic motorway journeys one of the first lockdowns, to see him through windows, to see him through the window of his girlfriend's house. That there was something there about moving bodies across empty motorways, connecting yet not connecting, sort of complex life world connections going on between motherhood, menopause, empty nest, pandemic living, forced separation, cramped makeshift interior workspaces, living through screams, empty offices, and that piece of plastic will outlast us all and will never break down, unlike our frail and compostable and vulnerable bodies. So that little Lego figure and that little feeling of being rushing across the motorway are my two objects that I've put into the cabinet.
And there's some real effective resonances there, Joe, isn't there? And thinking about our work with students as well, how students are almost on the receiving end of your affective journeys with your family and with your son, and empty lecture theatres that we had in first lockdown, and how we're doing things online now and teaching online. Lots of things to reflect and chew over in that cabinet, in that drawer particularly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What about your drawer, Nikki? What would you put in the cabinet?
I've got my mask and a dead bird in my drawer. We were going out for walks. Initially in England in the lockdown, we were only allowed to go out for a walk an hour a day when we were on full lockdown. And it's easy just to sit in your office all day long and stare at the screen. But I went out for a walk with my husband, and as we were walking, I was thinking a lot about disposable masks. They were everywhere, they still are. They've made a real resurgence. In fact, some colleagues at my institution have been reporting that there's been a 9,000% increase in waste masks that are just appearing all over
Wow.
the country.
Wow.
And these two pictures that are juxtaposed are a mask I found on one of my walks, and there was a dead pheasant at the side of the road, and you could barely see the pheasant because it was in a pile of leaves and it was almost unseeable. I suspect it had been hit by a car. It was by the side of a road, so I suspect it was an unfortunate victim of a hit and run. But it just made me really think about the sort of like thinking about extractive politics and waste and things that we don't even turn to notice sometimes. The masks have become part of our day-to-day life, and we see the rubbish at the side of the road, or we see dead animals, and we don't always notice those sorts of things, or we turn away because it's too painful to look at. So again, it was just about reflecting on how I work with young children and with teachers of young children to consider more sustainable ways of living and to notice some of these small things. But it also connected to some of the tragedy that was happening with the pandemic and is still happening with the pandemic, where loved ones unfortunately pass away and families are dealing with trauma and bereavement. And, this is going to be something that has an effective residence in all of our life worlds for a very long time. And things are still progressing, and, we're doing our best to muddle through, I suppose is the best word. And I want to think affirmatively about these things as well, because there's also real affirmative aspects of walking and being outside, and being able to move our eyes to distant places and to let our imaginations run free as well. So that's one of the things that's in one of my drawers of the cabinet. I'm just seeing what else we had in our drawers here.
We've got lots of things that people can read if they're interested to find out more.
Yeah.
Some papers that they're there, and also if this idea of cabinet of curiosities really piqued your interest, there's a little film there you can watch. There's how the National Trust have thought about, and also how the British Library and the British Museum have thought about the cabinets of curiosities. So we draw a lot from the museum world here.
Yeah. And I love this idea of opening drawers and closing doors. And we thought very much about how what we were trying to do with our online journaling was helping us to connect to some sort of sense of normalcy in our day-to-day lives, just by meeting up, talking about things, sharing our experiences. It really helped me to sort of get some sort of reality back into our lives as we are constantly on screens. But just
like a categorization, isn't it? Almost. Yeah. You categorize and you organize, all those actions help us to feel more normal. But I think the really interesting thing about the cabinet is that maybe when we close the door, it's still there. The effect of that thing is still with us.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it? We categorize, but we don't categorize with the cabinets, I suppose.
And also we were talking as we are now in a conversation. We've been having conversations, which takes you away from that formality of lectures. It's much more informal, it's much more rhizomatic, it's multiple, it's plural, and it's really allowed our minds to sort of wander all over these places. That meandering again, that
yes, lovely word. Yeah,
it really helped us think all these things through. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to invite you to become part of our cabinet of curiosities, and you can see a QR code here. If you scan that on, it should take you to the Padlet. If you want to map some of your own life worlds, we'd be really pleased to see them. We are going to write about life worlds, but we're also mindful that if you're sharing your information, it may be something that you may not want us to share. So we may or may not contact you with regards to that. So if you don't want this shared, just let us know on the Padlet. If you're happy, leave it as is. If you want to put an email on there, equally, we'll contact you before we do anything about it. So to close our presentation, or to close our conversation rather than presentation.
Yeah, definitely conversation.
I'm going to open another little drawer, which is a closing drawer, but also an open invitation to you. So I've actually written this down because I wanted to say this more clearly rather than conversationally. So to summarize what we've tried to achieve today, and with our cartography and our techno-tempo cartobodiment, is a becoming of human, non-human and other than human bodies, with two academics, that's me and Joe, posting, talking and thinking together virtually. And we're in different cities in England. We're in one in the north, one in the south. And we've been working through extraordinary global events, as we all have, living different lives than we normally would do. So we've been thinking about our online journaling, and this is one of our online journals. We have more. It's a cabinet of curiosities in its own right. This idea of the Wunderkammern, where a range of objects can form an assemblage of fragments. And I'm thinking of Maggie McClure's work there. And there's a paper by Carol Taylor et al., myself included, that thinks about the cabinet when we think about bags. And then we try and document some of our pandemic experiences. So Joe's work on documentation, I think, is really useful to reflect on there. And as we think about what new relationships have become enmeshed in this techno-tempo-carte embodiment, we'd like to invite you to become part of this as well. Maybe you'd like to share your images, sounds or objects or videos or anything to generate some new additions to our cabinet of curiosities. And in that way, we will be able to connect relationally with you, and it'll help to inform the way that we think, and hopefully you'll take something from what we're doing here as well. We hope that making these relational connections can afford us some alternative ways of living, affecting and sharing life worlds together apart. And we hope this might bring you some sort of connection and thinking about your own cabinets of curiosities. So I'm going to close that door, Joe. Was there any doors you wanted to open and close?
Just to say, come and join us.
Brilliant. Lovely. Well, thank you so much for listening to this presentation, conversation, Cabinet of Curiosity, Techno-Tempo-Carte embodiment. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope you'd like to post some things on the Padlet itself. Come and join our online journaling. We'd be thrilled to meet you.